Millionaire CEO took his mistress on vacation, returned to find his wife in the CEO chair. Maxwell Morgan strode through the gleaming glass doors of Morgan Technologies headquarters, tanned and rested from his 2-week business trip to the Mediterranean. He nodded to the security guard, who oddly avoided his eyes, and made his way to the executive elevator. His phone buzzed with a text from his executive assistant. Emergency board meeting in progress. Your presence requested immediately. Maxwell frowned. He hadn't been informed of any board meeting. Still, it was probably just Lawrence wanting to discuss the quarterly numbers. Nothing he couldn't handle with his usual charm. He straightened his Italian silk tie as the elevator ascended to the top floor. Perhaps he'd mentioned the strategic partnership he'd been negotiating in Monaco. That should impress them. The boardroom doors were closed when he arrived. Maxwell adjusted his cuffs, plastered on his CEO smile, and pushed them open with the confidence of a man who owned the room. The smile froze on his face. Every board member sat in their usual places around the massive table. But at the head, his seat sat Renata, his wife, dressed not in her usual charity luncheon attire but in a razor-sharp black suit that screamed authority. In front of her lay open folders, spreadsheets, and what looked suspiciously like bank statements. "Maxwell," Eleanor Vance said, breaking the awkward silence. "Thank you for joining us. We were just concluding our vote." "Vote?" Maxwell repeated, still standing in the doorway. "What vote? And why is my wife sitting in my chair?" Have you ever had that moment when someone who underestimated you finally realizes exactly who you are? When the person who betrayed you sees the consequences of their actions written across your face. For 20 years, Renata Morgan stood in her husband's shadow while he took credit for her work. Until the day she discovered his betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. What would you do if you discovered the person who vowed to love you forever was risking everything you built together to fund a lifestyle for another woman? Would you walk away quietly, or would you take back what was rightfully yours? Hey my queens, listen to me for a moment. There comes a time in every woman's life when the universe asks you a question. How much of yourself will you sacrifice before you remember your worth? We've all been there, giving our brilliance, our loyalty, our hearts to someone who treated them as entitlements rather than gifts. But here's the truth that took me decades to learn. The moment you stop accepting less than you deserve is the moment your real power emerges. Your value doesn't decrease because someone failed to see it. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is reclaiming what was always yours to begin with. This isn't just about revenge. It's about restoration. Your former chair, Renata corrected, her voice cool and measured. The board has just unanimously voted to remove you as CEO of Morgan Technologies. Effective immediately. Maxwell laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. This is a joke, right? Some kind of bizarre welcome home prank. I assure you it's no joke, Eleanor said. Please sit down. There's much to discuss. Maxwell remained standing, his gaze locked on Renata. What the hell do you think you're doing? Saving our company, Renata replied simply. She slid a folder toward the empty seat at the opposite end of the table. While you were sailing the Mediterranean with Kristen Wells, on the company dime, I might add, I've been uncovering exactly how deep your deception goes. Deception? What are you talking about? Maxwell's confident facade began to crack as he glanced around the room, finding no allies among the grim-faced board members. The Sentinel security flaws you concealed from our clients, Walterchin said. The research funds you diverted to personal expenses, added Diane Okafor. The offshore accounts, continued Lawrence Bennett. And of course, Renata finished. The affair with our chief marketing officer that you've been funding with company resources for the past 8 months. She pressed a button on a remote, and the large screen at the end of the boardroom lit up with a photograph. Maxwell and Kristen on the deck of a yacht, locked in an embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Where did you get that? Maxwell demanded, color draining from his face. That's your question? Renata's eyebrow arched. Not how could I betray my wife of 20 years? Not how could I risk the company we built together? Just, where did you get that? Maxwell's shock gave way to calculation. He pulled out a chair and sat, adopting a more conciliatory tone. Renata, darling, clearly there's been a misunderstanding. Yes, Kristen and I have become close. It's a momentary lapse in judgment, nothing more. As for these alleged financial improprieties, I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. Save it. Renata cut him off. I've already heard Kristen's tearful confession. She called me this morning after security escorted her from the building. You fired her? Maxwell's mask slipped again. The board did, yes. Just as they've now removed you with a nearly unanimous vote. Renata's voice remained steady, betraying none of the turmoil she must have felt. You diverted millions from our research budget to fund your affair and your lifestyle, Maxwell. You concealed critical security flaws that put our clients at risk. You betrayed everything we built together. This is ridiculous, Maxwell sputtered, looking around the table for support. I founded this company. I am Morgan Technologies. We founded this company, Renata corrected him. I wrote the original encryption algorithms. I secured our first 3 patents. I own 46% of the shares. She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. And unlike you, I never forgot what we were building, or who we were building it for. The board members watched in silence as 20 years of marriage and partnership unraveled before their eyes. So that's it, Maxwell finally said. You stage a coup while I'm away, and I'm just supposed to accept it? You can fight it, of course, Eleanor interjected. But given the evidence Renata has provided, evidence we've now verified independently, I wouldn't advise it. A quiet exit is your best option at this point. Maxwell's gaze darted around the room, searching for a way out, an angle he hadn't considered. Finding none, he turned back to Renata. What do you want? He asked, his voice low. Money? Is that it? Name your price. Renata's laugh was genuine, if tinged with bitterness. You still don't understand, do you? I don't want your money, Maxwell. I want what's mine. The recognition for my work. The company we built together. And my freedom from a marriage that has become nothing but an empty shell. She slid another folder across the table. Divorce papers. My attorneys have been working on them for some days. You'll find the terms quite generous, considering the circumstances. Maxwell stared at the folder as if it might bite him. And if I fight this? All of it, the company, the divorce. Then I'll release everything, Renata said simply. Every email, every doctored report, every photograph of you and your mistress, every financial record showing how you used company funds to buy her that Cartier bracelet while laying off our senior engineers. She paused, letting the threat sink in. How do you think that will play with the board? With shareholders? With a jury? The silence in the boardroom was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Maxwell finally said, his voice hollow. I had to, Renata replied. You left me no choice. Maxwell stood abruptly, straightening his jacket with a jerk. This isn't over. Actually, Maxwell, it is. Renata's voice stopped him as he turned to leave. It was over the moment you decided I wasn't worth your loyalty. Neither as your wife nor as your business partner. The only difference is that now you know it too. Sisters, have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known your worth? Share your story in the comments below. As the boardroom door closed behind Maxwell, Eleanor turned to Renata. That went about as well as could be expected. Better actually, Renata replied, gathering her documents. I half expected him to throw something. What now? Walter asked. Now, Renata said, standing to address the board. We save what he nearly destroyed. I'll need your full support to navigate the next few months. We have clients to reassure, vulnerabilities to fix, and a company culture to rebuild. As the board members nodded their agreement, Renata felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The burden of pretending, of looking the other way, of being less than she was capable of being. All of it gone in an instant. But how had she arrived at this moment of reckoning? The journey had begun just 5 days earlier, with an unmarked envelope delivered to her home office. 5 days earlier, Renata Morgan stared at the glossy photograph in her hand, her manicured nail tracing the edge where her husband's arm disappeared around the waist of a woman who was decidedly not her. The Monaco coastline sparkled behind them, the yacht that cost more than most people's homes gleaming white against the Mediterranean blue. "When did these arrive?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the hurricane raging inside her. "This morning, Mrs. Morgan," replied Vivian, her personal assistant of 15 years. The older woman's eyes held a mixture of sympathy and something else, respect, perhaps, for how calmly Renata was handling the revelation that her husband of 20 years was currently sailing the Mediterranean with his 30-year-old chief marketing officer. "And the other information I requested?" Vivian placed a thick manila folder on the antique desk that dominated Renata's home office. "Everything's here. Financial records, board meeting minutes from the last 6 months, and the irregularities you asked me to look into." "Thank you, Vivian." Renata's gaze lingered on the photograph one last moment before she set it aside. "Please cancel my Tech Foundation luncheon tomorrow. It seems I have more pressing matters to attend to." After Vivian left, Renata opened the folder and began methodically reviewing its contents. Maxwell Morgan, founder and CEO of Morgan Technologies, had built a vast tech empire developing cutting-edge AI security systems. Renata had been there from the beginning, first as his coding partner with her computer science doctorate, then as his wife, and finally as the elegant corporate spouse who managed their considerable charitable foundation while Maxwell ran the company. What most people didn't know, what Maxwell himself seemed to have forgotten, was that Renata still owned 46% of Morgan Technologies, and that she had never stopped paying attention to the code. The financial records told a story that made her blood run cold. Research funds diverted to shell companies. Promising security protocols mysteriously discontinued. And most disturbing of all, evidence that their breakthrough AI security system, the one Maxwell had been lauded for in the press, had critical vulnerabilities that had been deliberately concealed from government clients and private customers alike. But what truly made her hands tremble was where the diverted money had gone. Private jets, exclusive resorts, a diamond bracelet from Cartier that Renata had certainly never received. All while he slashed the research budget and laid off senior engineers who had been with them since the beginning. He hadn't just betrayed their marriage. He'd betrayed everything they'd built together, risking their life's work to fund his midlife crisis and his mistress's champagne lifestyle. Renata closed the folder and walked to the window of their Westchester estate, gazing out at the manicured gardens that suddenly seemed like an elaborate facade, just like her marriage. She'd suspected the affair for months. Maxwell's emergency business trips that required his CMO but not his CTO. The late-night calls he took in his study. The growing emotional distance. What she hadn't anticipated was that his moral compromises would extend to the company they'd built together, to the security systems people trusted with their most sensitive data. Renata returned to her desk and opened her laptop. With practiced ease, she navigated through the company's secure servers, accessing areas that Maxwell believed she no longer monitored. As the company's co-founder, she'd maintained backdoor access to all systems, a precaution she'd never expected to need. What she found confirmed her worst fears. The latest version of Sentinel, their flagship security product, had failed multiple penetration tests. Critical vulnerabilities had been identified months ago, yet the reports had been buried, the issues unaddressed. Meanwhile, Maxwell had been touting Sentinel as impenetrable to government agencies, financial institutions, and healthcare systems. It was fraud, plain and simple. And if those vulnerabilities were exploited, the damage would be catastrophic, not just to Morgan Technologies, but to the clients who trusted them with their most sensitive data. Renata's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Kristen Wells, the woman from the photographs, Maxwell's mistress. For a moment, Renata considered ignoring the call. What could Kristen possibly say that would matter now? But curiosity won out. "Kristen," she answered, her voice neutral. "This is unexpected." "Mrs. Morgan, Renata, Kristen's voice was shaking. "I don't know where to begin. Perhaps with why you're calling me instead of enjoying your Mediterranean vacation with my husband?" A sharp intake of breath. "You know. I know everything, Kristen. The affair. The diverted funds. the Sentinel vulnerabilities. All of it. Silence stretched between them. Then, "It wasn't supposed to be like this. He promised me no one would get hurt." Renata almost laughed. "And you believed him? He said the marriage was over in all but name, that you were just staying together for appearances, that once the new Sentinel rollout was complete, he'd make everything official." Kristen's words tumbled out in a rush. "But then I saw the reports he was hiding, the test failures. When I questioned him, he said it was standard practice, that all tech companies did it, that the vulnerabilities would be fixed in the next update. And the money? The expenses charged to the company? The offshore accounts?" Another pause. "He said it was his company, his money to spend as he saw fit." "I see." Renata's voice remained calm, though her grip on the phone tightened. "And what prompted this crisis of conscience, Kristen? Why call me now?" "Because I was wrong," Kristen said quietly. "Because what he's doing could hurt people. Because I realized that if he could lie so easily about his marriage, about the company's finances, about the security of our products, then he's probably lying to me too." Renata considered this. "What exactly do you want from me, Kristen?" "Nothing. I just thought you should know. All of it. Before someone gets hurt." After hanging up, Renata sat motionless at her desk, processing this unexpected development. Kristen's call had given her something valuable, confirmation from an insider, but it had also accelerated her timeline. If Kristen had figured out the truth, others would too. The vulnerabilities would be discovered. The fraud would be exposed. Morgan Technologies, the company she had helped build from nothing, would collapse under the scandal. Unless she acted first. Renata reached for her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never used. "Eleanor Vance speaking," answered the crisp voice of Morgan Technologies' board chairwoman. "Eleanor, it's Renata Morgan. We need to talk. How quickly can you arrange an emergency board meeting?" The next 24 hours passed in a blur of activity. Renata met privately with Eleanor, sharing everything she had discovered. Together, they approached Walter Chun and Diane Okafor, the two board members most likely to support immediate action. By midnight, they had secured commitments from a majority of the board. "They'll want to hear from Maxwell before making a final decision," Eleanor warned as they finalized their strategy over late-night coffee in Renata's home office. "Of course," Renata agreed, "and we'll give him that opportunity. But not until we've presented all the evidence." "He won't go quietly," Eleanor said, studying Renata over the rim of her cup. "He'll fight this with everything he has. I'm counting on it." Renata's smile was cold. "The more he fights, the more he'll reveal." Eleanor set down her cup. "May I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. How long have you known?" "About the affair, I mean." Renata sighed, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability with this woman she'd known for nearly 2 decades. "I suspected for months. The photographs just confirmed what I already knew." "And you're prepared for what comes next? The publicity, the questions, the speculation?" "I've been Mrs. Maxwell Morgan for 20 years, Eleanor. I've stood in his shadow, smiled for the cameras, hosted the dinner parties, run his charitable foundation. I've been the perfect corporate wife." Renata's voice hardened. "But before I was his wife, I was his partner, his equal. It's time to remind everyone of that fact, including Maxwell." Eleanor nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I've always seen you as more than just Maxwell's wife. Many of us on the board remember who really wrote the code that built this company." "Thank you for that," Renata said softly. "It means more than you know." As Eleanor left, Renata returned to her desk, opening a drawer she rarely accessed. Inside lay a small leather journal, a record of the early days of Morgan Technologies, when she and Maxwell had been equal partners in every sense. She flipped through pages of handwritten code, business plans in both their handwriting, photographs of their first tiny office in Cambridge. 23 years ago, they had been 2 brilliant graduate students with a revolutionary idea for encryption algorithms. She with her doctorate in computer science, he with his MBA and charismatic vision. They had been unstoppable together, she creating the technology, he selling it to investors, equal partners, equal founders, until they weren't. The shift had been so gradual she barely noticed it happening. First, it was Maxwell taking the lead in investor meetings while she focused on development. Then it was Maxwell becoming the face of the company while she worked behind the scenes. By the time they married 3 years into the company's existence, the narrative had already been established. Maxwell Morgan, brilliant founder and CEO. Renata Morgan, supportive wife. She had allowed it to happen, had even convinced herself it made strategic sense. Maxwell was charismatic, polished, the perfect CEO for a growing tech company. She preferred the quiet work of coding, of solving complex problems away from the spotlight. But somewhere along the way, her contributions had been erased entirely from the company's story. Her name removed from patents she had created. Her role reduced to wife rather than co-founder. Her technical expertise dismissed as Maxwell built his empire on her innovations. And now he had betrayed not just their marriage, but the very company they had built together. Renata closed the journal, her resolve hardening. Tomorrow, she would reclaim her place at Morgan Technologies. Not as Maxwell's wife, but as the brilliant engineer who had created its foundation. It was time to step out of the shadows. If the story is resonating with you, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling family. The emergency board meeting was set for 10 a.m. Renata arrived at Morgan Technologies headquarters at 7:30, using her rarely used executive access card to enter through the private entrance. She wanted time to prepare the boardroom, to be settled in her position before the others arrived. As she stepped into the elevator, a memory surfaced. The last time she had been in this building. 6 months ago, for the company's 20th anniversary celebration. She had stood beside Maxwell as he gave a speech about his vision and his company, never once acknowledging her role in its creation. She had smiled and applauded, playing her part perfectly. Today would be different. The executive floor was quiet when she arrived, most employees not yet at their desks. Renata walked purposefully to the boardroom, her heels clicking against the marble floors. Inside, she placed her materials at the head of the table, Maxwell's usual seat. A symbolic choice, but an important one. As she arranged the evidence folders, her phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Kristen Wells terminated as of 8 a.m. Security escorting her from building now. Renata hadn't requested Kristen's termination. That had been Eleanor's decision after reviewing the evidence of misappropriated funds. Still, she couldn't deny a certain satisfaction knowing that the woman who had helped Maxwell betray her was facing consequences. Her phone rang moments later, Kristen again. "Is this your doing?" Kristen demanded, her voice raw with emotion. "Having me escorted out like a criminal?" "No, Kristen, this is the consequence of your own actions," Renata replied calmly. "The board reviewed the evidence of how company funds were used to finance your relationship with Maxwell. Your termination was their decision. I told you everything. I helped you. And I didn't expose your role in the financial fraud. Consider that my thanks for your honesty." Renata paused. "I suggest you retain an attorney, Kristen. The SEC will have questions about those offshore accounts." After hanging up, Renata took a deep breath, centering herself. She couldn't afford to be distracted by Kristen's drama. Not today. By 9:45, the boardroom had filled with tense, whispering board members. Eleanor had briefed them on the basics, but the full extent of Maxwell's deception would be revealed in the meeting. Renata sat quietly at the head of the table, projecting a calm she didn't entirely feel. At precisely 10 a.m., Eleanor called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "As I mentioned in my communications, we're facing a serious situation that requires immediate board action. I've asked Renata Morgan to present the evidence she's uncovered regarding certain activities by our CEO, Maxwell Morgan." All eyes turned to Renata as she stood, distributing folders to each board member. "What I'm about to share with you will be shocking," she began, her voice steady. "But I ask that you review the evidence before making any judgments." For the next 45 minutes, Renata methodically laid out her case. The sentinel vulnerabilities that had been concealed from clients. the diverted research funds, the offshore accounts, the falsified reports to government agencies, and finally, the personal expenses, including the Mediterranean vacation with Kristen Wells, that had been charged to the company. The board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to shock to grim understanding as they reviewed the documentation. If these allegations are true, Lawrence Bennett said slowly, we're facing potential criminal charges, securities fraud, wire fraud, breach of contract with government clients. Not to mention a complete breakdown of corporate governance, added Diane Okafor. How did this happen without our knowledge? Because Maxwell deliberately kept this information from the board, Renata explained. Reports were altered before they reached you. Financial data was obscured through a complex web of subsidiaries and contractors. And you discovered all this, how? Asked James Wilson, the newest board member and a longtime friend of Maxwell's. I wrote the original security protocols for our systems, Mr. Wilson. I may have stepped back from day-to-day operations, but I never lost my access or my expertise. Renata met his skeptical gaze directly. And unlike my husband, I never stopped caring about the integrity of what we built. Eleanor cleared her throat. The question now is how we respond. Given the severity of these allegations, I believe we must take immediate action to protect the company, our shareholders, and our clients. Maxwell should have the opportunity to defend himself, James protested. And he will, Eleanor assured him. But in the meantime, we need interim leadership to address these issues, particularly the sentinel vulnerabilities that put our clients at risk. What are you suggesting? Lawrence asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I propose we temporarily remove Maxwell Morgan as CEO while we investigate these allegations, Eleanor said. And I nominate Renata Morgan to serve as interim CEO. The room erupted in overlapping voices. Questions, objections, concerns. Renata remained silent, letting Eleanor manage the debate. This was the moment of truth. Either the board would support her or Maxwell's influence would prevail. After nearly an hour of discussion, Eleanor called for a vote. One by one, the board members voiced their decisions. When the final vote was tallied, the result was clear: 13 in favor, 1 against. James Wilson cast the lone dissenting vote. Effective immediately, Maxwell Morgan is removed as CEO of Morgan Technologies, Eleanor announced formally. Renata Morgan is appointed interim CEO with full authority to address the Sentinel situation and any other issues requiring immediate attention. Renata accepted the decision with a graceful nod, betraying none of the fierce satisfaction that surged through her. I'll need the company jet ready tomorrow morning. I'm flying to Washington to meet with our government clients personally. As the meeting continued, finalizing the details of the transition, Renata's phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Maxwell's private jet just filed a flight plan from Nice to New York. Arrival estimated 8 p.m. tomorrow. Perfect timing. He would return to find his world completely transformed. It was at that moment that Maxwell's executive assistant had texted him about the emergency board meeting, setting in motion the confrontation that had just unfolded in the boardroom. Now, as Renata watched Maxwell storm out, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also a profound sadness for what might have been. 20 years of marriage ended in a 10-minute conversation. Partnership dissolved. A future irrevocably altered. The press will need to be managed, Walterchin said, breaking into her thoughts. Once word gets out about Maxwell's removal, the stock will take a hit. I've prepared a statement, Renata replied, sliding copies across the table. Transparent but measured. We acknowledge leadership changes and our commitment to addressing the Sentinel vulnerabilities, without detailing the personal aspects of the situation. The board members reviewed the statement, making minor suggestions. Renata incorporated their feedback, impressed by their quick pivot to supporting her leadership. Perhaps they had always seen more in her than she realized. What about Maxwell? James Wilson asked, still clearly uncomfortable with the situation. What's to stop him from fighting this publicly? The evidence, Eleanor said simply. If Maxwell chooses to make this ugly, the full details, including his affair and misuse of company funds, will become public. I don't think that's in anyone's best interest, least of all his. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out with promises of support. Only Eleanor remained behind. That was impressive, she told Renata. You handled yourself like you've been CEO for years. In some ways I have been, Renata replied. Just without the title. Eleanor smiled. Well, you have it now. What's your first official act as CEO? Renata glanced around the boardroom, at the space that had been dominated by Maxwell's presence for so long. I'm moving into the CEO's office today. I want to review all the Sentinel documentation before I meet with government clients tomorrow. And personally? Renata's expression hardened slightly. I'm having my things moved out of our Westchester house. I won't be going back there. That's probably wise, Eleanor agreed. Where will you stay? The company keeps an executive apartment in Manhattan. I'll use that for now. Renata gathered her materials. I have a company to save, Eleanor. Everything else is secondary. As Eleanor left, Renata stood alone in the boardroom, the weight of what lay ahead settling on her shoulders. Morgan Technologies employed over 4,000 people. Their security systems protected sensitive data for government agencies, financial institutions, and healthcare systems. The company's survival and all those depending on it now rested in her hands. For a moment, doubt crept in. Could she really do this? Lead a multi-million-dollar company through its greatest crisis? Face the skepticism that would inevitably come from being the wife who took over? Then she remembered who she was. Not just Renata Morgan, wife of Maxwell, but Dr. Renata Morgan, brilliant computer scientist, creator of the encryption algorithms that had built an empire, co-founder of Morgan Technologies. It was time the world remembered that too. The next 48 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Renata worked through the night, reviewing the full extent of the Sentinel vulnerabilities and developing a comprehensive plan to address them. By morning, she was on the company jet to Washington, where she spent the day in back-to-back meetings with government clients. This level of transparency is unusual, noted the director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency as their meeting concluded. As is a company's founder deliberately concealing security flaws, Renata countered. I can't undo the damage Maxwell has done, but I can ensure we handle it properly from this point forward. By the time she emerged from the government building, the afternoon sun was setting over the Capitol. Her driver held the car door as she slid into the back seat, finally allowing herself a moment to check her phone. 63 missed calls from Maxwell, 28 text messages, ranging from confused to angry to threatening, and one voicemail from Kristen Wells, tearfully explaining that she hadn't known about the concealed vulnerabilities, that she'd only been following Maxwell's instructions. Renata deleted them all without listening to the rest. She had a press conference to prepare for. At precisely 8:15 p.m., Renata Morgan stepped up to a podium bearing the Morgan Technologies logo, cameras flashing as she faced the assembled press. Her charcoal Armani suit projected authority. Her expression conveyed appropriate gravity without panic. Good evening. As you know, Morgan Technologies is currently addressing serious concerns regarding our Sentinel security system. I want to be absolutely clear. Client security is our highest priority. We are working closely with all affected customers to address these vulnerabilities and have deployed a dedicated response team to provide 24/7 support during this transition. She continued, outlining the company's response plan in clear, confident terms. No corporate doublespeak, no evasions, just straightforward accountability and decisive action. As she concluded her statement and began taking questions, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She ignored it, focusing on a reporter's question about potential liability and client compensation. Only after the press conference, as she was being driven to the company's executive apartment in Manhattan, did Renata check the message. I'm at the penthouse. We need to talk. Now. Renata stared at the screen, a cold smile forming on her lips. The penthouse. Their $22 million Central Park West apartment that Maxwell had insisted on buying 3 years ago, against her better judgment, as a necessary status symbol for a CEO of his stature. Change of plans, she told her driver. Take me to the Morgan Technologies headquarters instead. If Maxwell wanted a confrontation, he could come to her, in the office that now belonged to her. On her terms, not his. My queens, tag someone who needs to hear this message of empowerment and reclaiming your worth. Maxwell Morgan stormed into the Morgan Technologies executive suite at 10:47 p.m., his face flushed with rage, still wearing the linen shirt and designer sunglasses that spoke of Mediterranean leisure. He found Renata sitting calmly behind what had been his desk until yesterday, reviewing code on multiple monitors as if this were any ordinary evening. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, slamming the door behind him. Renata looked up, her expression composed. "Hello, Maxwell. How was Sardinia?" "Don't play games with me, Renata. You've gone completely off the rails. Calling an emergency board meeting? Going to our government clients? A press conference?" His voice rose with each question. "Do you have any idea what you've done to our stock price?" "Our stock price," Renata repeated, emphasizing the first word. "Interesting, that's your primary concern. Not the clients whose sensitive data could have been compromised. Not the thousands of employees whose livelihoods you jeopardized with your deception." "Deception? That's ridiculous. We were addressing some code anomalies." "Stop lying, Maxwell." Renata's voice cut through his protestations like a scalpel. "I've seen all the documentation. The emails ordering development teams to remove vulnerability reports. The transfers to offshore accounts. The falsified penetration test results." She stood, her height in heels bringing her nearly eye to eye with him. "And yes, I've also seen the photographs of you and Kristen on the Azure Lady. The yacht you rented with company funds while you were supposed to be at a conference in London." Maxwell's expression shifted, calculation replacing outrage. "Renata, darling, you're overreacting. Yes, Kristen and I have become close. It's a midlife indiscretion, nothing more. As for the Sentinel vulnerabilities, there were some judgment calls made under intense competitive pressure, but nothing that rises to the level of fraud." "Save it for your criminal defense attorney," Renata replied coolly. "You'll need one, by the way. The SEC has opened an investigation based on the information I provided them this morning, not to mention the potential violations of federal contracting requirements." The color drained from Maxwell's face. "You wouldn't dare." "I already have." Renata returned to her seat, the CEO's chair that had been his for 20 years. "The board voted unanimously to remove you, Maxwell. Your access to company systems has been revoked. Your corporate credit cards have been canceled. Security has instructions not to allow you into the building after tonight." "This is my company," he shouted, mask of reasonableness slipping. "You can't do this to me." "Our company," Renata corrected him. "Or have you forgotten that I own 46% of the shares? That my code formed the foundation of our first 3 products? That I've been silently debugging your messes for 2 decades while you took all the credit?" She leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. "You forgot who I am, Maxwell. You forgot that before I was your wife, I was your partner, your equal. You thought my silence was weakness, my support was submission. That was your first mistake." Maxwell stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "What do you want? Money? Is that it? Name your price." Renata laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to startle him. "I want what's mine. Control of the company we built together. Recognition for the work I've done. And freedom from a marriage that has become nothing but an empty shell." She opened a drawer and removed a thick envelope, sliding it across the desk. "Divorce papers. My attorneys have been working on them for weeks, ever since the private investigator confirmed my suspicions about you and Kristen. You'll find the terms quite generous, considering the circumstances." Maxwell made no move to take the envelope. "And if I fight this? All of it, the company, the divorce? Then I'll release everything," Renata said simply. "Every email, every doctored report, every photograph of you and your mistress. Every financial record showing how you used company funds for personal expenses. She paused, letting the threat sink in. How do you think that will play with the board? With shareholders? With a jury? The silence stretched between them, 20 years of shared history cracking under the weight of betrayal and consequences. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Maxwell finally said, his voice hollow. I had to, Renata replied. You left me no choice. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned toward the door. This isn't over. Actually, Maxwell, it is. Renata's voice stopped him with his hand on the doorknob. It was over the moment you decided I wasn't worth your loyalty. Neither as your wife nor as your business partner. The only difference is that now you know it too. After he left, Renata sat alone in the CEO's office, her office now, and allowed herself a moment to feel the full weight of what had just transpired. 20 years of marriage ended in a 10-minute conversation. Partnership dissolved. A future irrevocably altered. She should have felt devastated. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Relief. The burden of pretending, of looking the other way, of being less than she was capable of being. All of it lifted from her shoulders like a physical weight. Renata Morgan picked up her phone and dialed Vivian's number. It's done, she said when her assistant answered. Have my things moved from the penthouse to the company apartment. And schedule a meeting with the development team for 8 a.m. We have a company to rebuild. The next morning, Renata stood before Morgan Technology's development team, 30 brilliant engineers who looked equal parts nervous and curious about their new CEO. Many of them had never interacted directly with her before, knowing her only as Maxwell's wife, who occasionally appeared at company functions. I know what you're thinking, she began, addressing the elephant in the room. You're wondering if I'm qualified to lead this company, if I'm just here because I'm Maxwell's wife, if I understand the technology well enough to guide our path forward. She paused, letting the tension build, then turned to the whiteboard and began writing complex encryption code from memory. The original algorithm she had developed 23 years ago that still formed the backbone of their security systems. I wrote this code in 1999, in a cramped apartment in Cambridge, while working on my doctorate, she said, continuing to write without hesitation. It's the foundation of everything Morgan Technologies has built. I didn't just marry into this company. I created it. She set down the marker and turned back to face the stunned team. Now, let's talk about how we're going to fix Sentinel. For the next 3 hours, Renata led a technical deep dive that left no doubt about her expertise. She identified vulnerabilities, proposed solutions, challenged assumptions, and ultimately approved a comprehensive plan to address the security flaws that Maxwell had concealed. We'll need to work around the clock, she concluded. Our clients deserve nothing less. I've authorized overtime for everyone involved and additional resources as needed. This is our top priority. As the meeting broke up, Renata noticed a young engineer lingering behind. Meera Patel had been with the company for only 2 years but had already established herself as one of their most innovative thinkers. Ms. Patel, did you have a question? Meera hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. Not a question exactly. I just wanted to say, I came to Morgan Technologies because of your early work on quantum-resistant encryption. Your papers from MIT were what inspired me to pursue this field. Renata blinked in surprise. I didn't realize anyone still associated that work with me. Some of us do, Meera said simply. And it's good to finally have you leading us. As Meera left, Renata felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. For years, she had told herself that stepping back from the company, letting Maxwell take the spotlight, had been her choice. That she preferred working behind the scenes. That the recognition didn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered to the young women like Meera who needed to see themselves reflected in leadership. It mattered to the integrity of the work they did. And she finally admitted to herself it mattered to her. The days that followed tested Renata in ways she hadn't anticipated. The stock price plummeted as news of Maxwell's removal spread. Clients demanded reassurance. Competitors circled, sensing weakness. And the tech press, long accustomed to Maxwell's charismatic presence, questioned whether his housewife could possibly lead a cutting-edge technology company. They're calling you the placeholder, Vivian reported grimly, showing Renata an industry blog post, betting on how quickly the board will replace you with a real tech executive. Let them bet, Renata replied, unfazed. We have more important concerns. And they did. The Sentinel security patch was progressing well, but their government clients were growing impatient. The SEC investigation had expanded, with investigators now camped out in their financial department. And Maxwell, true to form, had begun a whisper campaign suggesting that Renata had orchestrated a coup out of jealousy over his affair. Through it all, Renata maintained a steady hand. She met with clients personally, walking them through the security fixes. She cooperated fully with the SEC, providing all requested documentation. And she ignored the personal attacks, focusing instead on rebuilding the company's reputation. 2 weeks into her tenure as CEO, Renata faced her first major crisis. A prominent tech blogger published an article claiming that the Sentinel vulnerabilities had already been exploited, with sensitive government data potentially compromised. The stock dropped another 15% in hours. Panic spread through the company. Renata called an emergency all-hands meeting in the company auditorium. I'll be brief, she told the assembled employees. The report is false. We have been monitoring all Sentinel deployments continuously since discovering the vulnerabilities, and there has been no breach. We've traced the source of this rumor to a competitor attempting to poach our clients during this transition. She paused, looking out at the sea of worried faces. But this attack highlights something important. The world is watching us. They're waiting for us to fail. Some because they've always seen Morgan Technologies as Maxwell's company, not ours collectively. Some because they don't believe a woman can lead a major tech firm. Some because they stand to profit from our downfall. Renata stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the edge of the stage. I need each of you to make a decision today. If you believe this company is finished without Maxwell Morgan, there's the door. No judgment. Take your talents elsewhere. The auditorium was silent, hundreds of employees frozen in their seats. But if you believe in what we're building, in secure systems that protect our clients' most sensitive data, if you believe that Morgan Technologies is more than one man's ego trip, then I need you all in. Working nights and weekends if necessary. Answering client calls at 3 a.m. Doing whatever it takes to prove that we are still the best security firm in the business. She looked out at the crowd, making eye contact with as many people as possible. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise that when we come through this, and we will come through this, you'll be part of something extraordinary. A company that faced a crisis of integrity and emerged stronger. A team that refused to be defined by one person's failures. For a moment, the auditorium remained silent. Then, from the back row, someone began to applaud. Others joined in, the applause building until it filled the space with a thunderous affirmation. Renata felt something shift in that moment, not just in the company's morale, but in her own sense of purpose. This wasn't just about reclaiming what Maxwell had taken from her. It was about building something better than what had existed before. As the weeks passed, Renata's leadership began to yield results. The Sentinel security patch was completed ahead of schedule, earning praise from industry experts. Client retention stabilized as trust was gradually rebuilt. The stock price began a slow recovery, and Renata herself transformed, shedding the careful restraint that had defined her public persona as Maxwell's wife. In meetings, she was incisive and authoritative. In press interviews, she was forthright about the company's challenges and clear about her vision for its future. In industry panels, she spoke with the confidence of someone who had been leading for decades. You've changed, Eleanor observed over lunch. A month into Renata's tenure as CEO, there's a lightness to you now. Renata considered this. I spent 20 years making myself smaller to accommodate Maxwell's ego, dimming my light so he could shine brighter. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I stopped. And now I remember who I am. Renata smiled. And it turns out, I rather like her. The true test came 6 weeks after Maxwell's removal, when Renata presented at the prestigious Cyber SEC conference in San Francisco. It was her first major industry appearance as CEO, and, not coincidentally, an event where Maxwell had always been a featured speaker. The auditorium was packed, the audience a mix of tech executives, security professionals, and industry analysts. Many, Renata knew, had come out of curiosity rather than respect. They wanted to see if Maxwell's wife could hold her own on the technical stage he had dominated for so long. As Renata stepped to the podium, she felt a moment of trepidation. Then she looked out at the audience and spotted Mira Patel in the front row, along with several other Morgan Technologies engineers who had traveled to support her. Their presence steadied her. "Good afternoon," she began. "I'm Dr. Renata Morgan, CEO of Morgan Technologies. And today I want to talk about trust." For the next 45 minutes, Renata delivered a masterclass in technical leadership. She detailed the Sentinel vulnerabilities with unflinching honesty, explained the comprehensive fixes they had implemented, and outlined a new framework for security transparency that set a new standard for the industry. She didn't mention Maxwell once. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood the subtext, that she was charting a new course, one based on technical excellence and integrity rather than charisma and corner-cutting. The standing ovation that followed her presentation wasn't just polite acknowledgement. It was recognition, respect, perhaps even a touch of awe. As Renata stepped away from the podium, her phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Stock up 12% since you started speaking. The market believes in you." Renata smiled, pocketing her phone as she made her way through the crowd of well-wishers and industry colleagues eager to speak with her. For the first time since taking over as CEO, she felt not just confident but vindicated. She wasn't just surviving in Maxwell's absence. She was thriving. The real surprise came at the conference reception that evening. Renata was deep in conversation with the CTO of a major financial institution when she felt a presence at her elbow. She turned to find James Wilson, the board member who had been Maxwell's strongest ally and the lone vote against her appointment as CEO. "Dr. Morgan," he said formally, "may I have a word?" Excusing herself from the conversation, Renata followed James to a quieter corner of the reception hall. "Your presentation today was impressive," he began, clearly uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology." Renata raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I voted against your appointment because I believed you were acting out of personal vengeance, rather than the company's best interests." James met her gaze directly. "I was wrong. What you've accomplished in 6 weeks is remarkable. The Sentinel fix, the client retention, the cultural shift within the company. You've proven yourself to be exactly the leader Morgan Technologies needs right now." "Thank you, James," Renata said simply. "Your support means a great deal to me, and to the board." He nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Maxwell approached me last week. He's planning to challenge your position at the next shareholder meeting. He believes he can gather enough proxy votes to force the board to reinstate him." Renata absorbed this information with outward calm, though her mind was already calculating the implications. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him he was delusional," James said bluntly. "The board is unanimously behind you now. The stock is recovering. Clients are staying. Even if he could somehow gather the votes, which he can't, the SEC investigation alone would prevent his return." "I appreciate the warning," Renata said, "and your candor." As James moved away, Renata remained in the quiet corner, processing this new development. Of course, Maxwell wouldn't give up easily. His ego wouldn't allow it. But the fact that he had approached James, his strongest ally on the board, and been rebuffed spoke volumes about how thoroughly the power had shifted. 3 months after taking over as CEO, Renata stood at the podium at the annual tech industry conference, the spotlight illuminating her as she addressed the packed auditorium. "When we founded Morgan Technologies 20 years ago, we had one guiding principle: security built on trust. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that principle. I'm here today to tell you how we're finding our way back." The audience, industry leaders, tech journalists, and potential clients listened intently as she outlined the company's transformation. The stock price, which had plummeted after the initial revelations, had rebounded to nearly its previous high. Client retention had exceeded all projections. And the new Sentinel 2.0 had just received the highest security certification in the industry. Second chances are rare in this business, Renata concluded. We're grateful for yours, and we won't waste it. The applause was thunderous as she stepped away from the podium. As she made her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions, her phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. He's here. Renata looked up, scanning the room until she spotted him near the back. Maxwell, looking thinner and less polished than she remembered, watching her with an unreadable expression. She excused herself from the conversation and made her way toward him, aware of the curious glances following her progress. Maxwell, she said when she reached him. This is unexpected. You're doing well, he observed, nodding toward the stage she'd just left. The stock's up. The press is fawning. Everyone loves a comeback story. Is that why you're here? To see the comeback? He shook his head. I'm selling my shares. All of them. I've had an offer. Renata studied him, noting the signs of strain around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. The past 3 months hadn't been kind to him. The divorce had been finalized. The SEC investigation was ongoing. And according to industry gossip, Kristen had left him for a venture capitalist shortly after the scandal broke. I have the right of first refusal, she reminded him. I know. That's why I came to tell you in person. He hesitated, then added, It's a good offer, Renata. Above market value. She considered this. Buying his shares would give her controlling interest in the company, over 70%. No more answering to the board. Complete autonomy to lead Morgan Technologies however she saw fit. I'll match it, she decided. Have your attorney contact mine with the details. Maxwell nodded, unsurprised. I thought you might. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the affair, but for everything. For forgetting who we were. Who you are. Renata felt the weight of 20 years between them. The brilliant partnership they'd once had. The love that had turned to indifference. The betrayal that had finally set her free. I'm not, she said simply. Sorry, that is. Everything that happened led me here. And here is exactly where I'm meant to be. As Maxwell walked away, disappearing into the crowd for the last time, Renata turned back toward the conference floor. Toward her company. Toward her future. The burden of his shadow was finally lifted. The company they had built together was now truly hers. And the woman who had once been content to stand in the background while her husband took the credit was now exactly where she belonged. In the spotlight on her own terms. 6 months after that final encounter with Maxwell, Renata sat in her office reviewing the quarterly results. Morgan Technologies had not just recovered, it was thriving. The stock price had surpassed its previous high. New clients were signing on at an unprecedented rate. And the company culture had transformed, with employee satisfaction scores at an all-time high. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Vivian entered carrying a small package. This just arrived for you, she said, placing it on Renata's desk. Hand-delivered. Renata examined the package curiously. No return address, just her name written in an unfamiliar hand. She opened it carefully to find a small leather-bound journal and a handwritten note. Dr. Morgan, I found this while cleaning out my father's office. I thought you should have it. With respect and admiration, Sophia Morgan. Renata stared at the signature in shock. Sophia Morgan, Maxwell's daughter from his brief first marriage. A young woman now in her mid-20s whom Renata had met only a handful of times over the years. Maxwell had never been close with his daughter, another relationship sacrificed to his ambition. With trembling fingers, Renata opened the journal. Inside, in Maxwell's distinctive handwriting, were notes from the earliest days of Morgan Technologies. Business plans, code snippets, meeting summaries. And on page after page, acknowledgments of Renata's contributions. Ours encryption algorithm is revolutionary. This changes everything. Are convinced the Stanford team. Without her, we'd have lost the contract. Note to self, make sure R gets proper credit on the patent. This is her breakthrough. Tears pricked at Renata's eyes as she flipped through the pages. Here was evidence of what she had always known but could never prove, that in the beginning Maxwell had recognized her as an equal partner, that somewhere along the way he had made the conscious decision to erase her contributions, to rewrite their shared history. The final entry, dated just weeks before their confrontation in the boardroom, hit her like a physical blow. 20 years since I created the algorithm that built this empire. 20 years of taking credit for her genius. She could have been greater than me if I hadn't held her back. Too late to fix it now. She'd never forgive me. Not sure I deserve forgiveness anyway. Renata closed the journal, emotions warring within her. Not regret. She would never regret reclaiming her place or rebuilding the company with integrity. But perhaps a softening of the anger she had carried, a recognition that Maxwell, in his private thoughts at least, had acknowledged the truth. Her intercom buzzed. "Dr. Morgan, the development team is ready for you in the conference room." "Thank you, Vivian. I'll be right there." Renata placed the journal in her desk drawer. Perhaps someday she would reach out to Sophia, build the relationship that Maxwell had neglected. Another bridge to repair in the wake of his destruction. But for now, she had a company to lead. A team waiting for her guidance. A future to build that was entirely her own. As she walked to the conference room, Renata passed the wall of company milestones she had installed when she redesigned the executive floor. Unlike the previous display, which had featured only Maxwell, this one told the true story of Morgan Technologies, including photographs of both founders, patent documents bearing both their names, and recognition of the team members who had contributed to their success over the years. The final frame held a simple quote, one that Renata had chosen carefully. "Your value doesn't decrease because someone failed to see it." Words she had lived by during the darkest days of her transformation. Words she hoped would inspire others, especially the women in her company, to recognize their worth, to claim their space, to refuse to be diminished. In the conference room, Renata took her place at the head of the table, surrounded by the brilliant team she had assembled. Mira Patel, now promoted to lead the quantum encryption division. Eleanor Vance, who had transitioned from board chair to chief strategy officer. And a dozen others who had believed in her vision for a company built on integrity and innovation. "Let's begin," Renata said, opening her laptop. "We have the future to invent." If you've enjoyed this journey of empowerment, please subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that remind us of our strength and worth.